right, everyone, so let's continue with the labor market. So in the previous video, we stopped at this graph where we were saying that we have suppliers of employment, which are the workers, and we have demanders for the services, which are basically the firms, and the interaction between the supply and the demand would determine a certain equilibrium where both are satisfied with uh, 40,000 in this example. And as I said in the previous video, of course, the workers would prefer a higher wage, but the employers will not be able to pay such a higher salary. So at this 50,000, we would be in a point of disequilibrium where we have a supply of 30,000 workers versus a demand of only 10,000. Okay, so we will have a disequilibrium of 20,000 jobs. Okay, so this is a situation of unemployment because those suppliers will not be able to find a job, and the amount of jobs offered, I'm sorry, the amount of workers who are trying to find a job is 20K. The opposite is true if we are talking about 30,000, which is preferred by the firms. At this level, they actually would demand more workers. So if I'm comparing this point of equilibrium versus this point, so as the cost of hiring workers decreases, they will demand more and more and more. So it's a movement along the demand curve until they reach 30,000, right? But at this 30,000, the workers are not happy about it. So that's why they reduced their demand, right? And they are actually at 10,000 workers. And here we have a shortage of workers because employers are demanding 30, but they only can find 10,000. So this is a shortage of workers, and you can call this the shortage part. And this is like exactly like what we did with the introduction to economics, and this is the surplus of workers, okay, or we can call it the unemployment. So based on that, an interaction is going to happen until we reach a point of satisfaction for both employers and workers, which we call the point of equilibrium. There can be other factors that lead to a shift in the demand curve or the supply curve. So you can write the demand for workers as by the firms is a function of wages or earnings, and also the supply of workers is a function of wages. But we can also list, besides the wages, other factors, right? Because there are so many other things that affect the demand to hire more workers. Let's say any shock, like a supply shock, like say, for example, the example that we will discuss in the Alaskan labor market could be like a supply shock, right, that affects the demand for workers. And in this situation, this shock, let me write it as SH so you are not confused with the supply. So this shock was a shock in the labor market where they discovered 10 billion barrels of oil. Okay, and this was in 1968. So that means there is a shock in the labor market and they started to demand more workers. Okay, and this was in the 1968. Also, the supply of workers is a function of how much I'm gonna get, but also other factors. Let's say you have someone to take care about, let's say whether a child or an elderly person, then this is like would be other personal reasons, right? And that would affect the supply of service. So you can say something personal, let's say taking care of a child or an elderly person, and this would affect the amount of hours that you can supply in the labor market. But anytime I'm talking about the price or the wage or the earning, you can call it whatever, then we are talking about a movement along the curve. Any other factor, whether it's a supply shock, whether it's a demand shock, whether it's a personal reason, whether any other factor, then this would lead to a shift in either the supply or the demand curve. So in this particular example, we are talking again about the Alaskan labor market, and we are trying to see how the discovery of a 10 billion barrels of oil led to an increase in the demand for workers, and this demand for workers was because there was a project that started in 1974 all the way to 1979, and this project was to build 789 miles of pipes. Okay, so oil pipes, 789. So in order to build that amount of pipes, they needed workers, so they started to demand workers during the period of that project. So looking at the data, we have here the employment and we have here the monthly salary, and as you can see, the monthly salary and the employment are, at some points, they are kind of moving together, right? But there is a situation where we have a spike in the data, and this spike in the data happened from 1974 all the way to around the 1979, right? And this was the period of the project where they started to build the miles and miles, which is basically 789 miles of pipes, and they started to demand workers. So the employment, which is in the black line, started to increase, and also the wages, which is in the blue line, also increased to attract more and more workers. And then after the end of the project, these trends went back almost to normal. So if we check the wages, for example, the wages went almost around the same trend that it was before that spike or before that project. Of course, there is a slight jump because of the increase in the cost of living, but in general, it went back to kind of the same movements around a certain trend before the project has started. In terms of employment was here, but then there was like this big jump, this big spike, and then it went back to a certain trend, which is the population average, because the population is growing anyway with a certain rate, so it's going back to the normal rate of the increase in population. Why we need the theory? Because every time we need to back up our observation with a certain theory, a solid understanding of what's going on in the market, whether this is a market for Pepsi, pizza, or a market for the workers. Okay, so each and every time we are talking about the theory, we need to determine certain important variables, the most important crucial variables, and we are going to forget about the minor effects, the least important ones. We use these factors to create a model, okay? And it's kind of a mathematical model, and we try to translate the theory into a certain model. For example, when I'm talking about the demand theory, we are saying that demand is a function of the price, and every time the price increases, my demand for a certain product decreases. So it's a negative relationship. So this is what we understand from the theory. This is what makes sense, and this is what the demand curve was showing us, right? That there is a negative relationship between the quantity demanded and the price. So we can also create a model, and by the model we say that demand is equal to a certain intercept, right, plus a certain slope times the price. So every time the price changes, the demand is going to change by that amount, and this is what we call the slope, and this slope is simply the change in demand due to the change in the price, and we already know that this slope is negative, right? So we try to translate all our understanding of the theory into a certain model so that we can take this model, collect important data related to this model, and we run this model and we try to see whether our observations and our predictions from this model matches what the theory was saying. There are two important distinctions in economics. When we say positive versus normative economics, positive is always a fact. This is always a number. Let's say the unemployment rate is equal to 10%, for example. So and this is a fact. This is a positive economics, okay? So it's basically focused on the facts, what it is, right? And the questions are answered by tools of economists, which is basically the softwares that we use and the models that we use of quantitative analysis in order to answer these questions. So it's all based on facts, actual things that are happening in the market. Normative economics is basically kind of your opinion, okay? And it requires judgment, and there is nothing right or wrong. It depends on how you analyze the results and how you give us your opinion, okay? So it addresses values, it focuses on what should be, it requires judgment. So you might have an article, and in this article we have a mix of positive and normative, facts and opinions, right? And it's like what we have taken before, maybe in elementary school. You would be given a paragraph and the question would be whether this is a positive or normative economics, or in other words, whether this is a fact or an opinion, okay? So for example, when I say unemployment rate is 10% or unemployment rate has decreased by 2%, then this is a positive economics, this is a fact. But when I ask you, what do you think the impact of the drop in unemployment by 2% on, for example, the wage rate? So this is a normative economics that would require your analysis and your judgment about what is going on in the labor market, for example. So towards the end of this topic, we basically, or this chapter, we basically kind of covered the most important things that we will cover in the remaining of this course. We will be talking about, the next topic is about the supply, the next demand, the next is the equilibrium, and then we will start talking about more details of these different components. So we will be talking about the tools, which are basically covering the regression analysis. So the next chapter will be about the supply decisions, the demand decisions, equilibrium, differences in job characteristics, okay? And this is from the demand side, right? So we are talking about more details of this one. And then differences in workers' characteristics, so we will be talking more details about the first one. And then we will be talking about mobility, the ability of workers to move between either jobs, between states, between counties, how this affects the labor wage. We will also be talking about discrimination, whether it's a discrimination against females, discrimination against certain race, right? And discrimination about certain nationality, discrimination about certain religious, and so on. So we have different types of discriminations in the labor market that we will address in one of the coming topics. Union, so we'll talk about the ability of workers to get together so that they are stronger in asking about their demands. So we'll be talking about unionization and how it affects the labor market. Incentive pay schemes, how can we offer different incentives to workers in order to affect their decisions to work more or to work less. And then we will also talk about the unemployment, which is a big problem in different countries, and it's affecting the labor market and how it affects the wages. So The appendix of this chapter is about a regression analysis, and it's like what I wrote before. Like when I write like the demand is equal to A plus B wage, then this is the intercept. It's like the alpha here. This is the positive slope. It's like this line shows a positive slope, and B here is the slope itself, or the beta here, which is the change in log wage due to the change in years of schooling, right? So the more educated the person is, the higher the percentage change in wage. So this is, for example, a positive relationship. When we were talking about demand and wage, this one is a negative relationship. Okay, but by default we just write an equation as positive, and then after you do, or after you're done with the analysis, you will find a positive or negative relationship. If I'm specifically talking about the demand for workers and the price of workers, then this one would be negative. Okay, so then this one would be a negative relationship. If I'm talking about wages as a function of years of schooling, then this would be a positive relationship. We will also talk about scatter diagrams. So scatter diagram are these just the dots, right, that connects a variable on the y-axis, on the x-axis versus the variable on the y-axis. So here in this case, again, years of schooling versus the percentage change in wages. If we connect the dots, or we try to connect the dots, and this is what we do in econometrics, we have a scatter plot and we try to use different econometric techniques in order to be able to connect the dots, right, and find a regression line. Also, we will be talking about different trends in the data. So whether it's a positive and steep, right, whether it's a positive and more flat, whether it's a negative relationship. So we have different trends that we will discuss throughout this course. We will also talk about the best fit regression, because I might have this line, I might also have this line, so it gets to this point. Or I might have this line, right, it gets up to this point. Which one is the better? Which one is the best, I mean? So we will need to figure out which one minimizes the amount of error in my estimation. So we will be talking also about this. Multiple regression analysis, it's basically you are talking about more than one variable. So the dependent variable is affected by wages and other factors. So it's not just one factor, but it's multiple factors, and that's why we call it multi-regression analysis. And this brings us towards the end of this chapter, and before we end this video, I just want to bring attention to important websites, not here, it's here. So important websites. So the first website is the Department of Labor, and the Department of Labor website, when we open it, and we will be using it throughout the course, different questions. So let's say one of the things that you will see once you click on dol.gov is the state minimum wage laws, where it's giving you different information about different states. For example, New Jersey, and the minimum wage is 15.13. This is the basic minimum wage. And also you have like New Mexico, you have New York, so you have different information about the minimum wage per state. Okay, so you have all the states here. You also have different resources that we will be talking about. We will be using some of these are free data sets that can be used throughout the semester. Okay, but this is like worth exploring, so you can just check it out. And also there is another important website, BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, where it's giving you different data tools about the different states. Okay, so we have here like the different data tools, whether you're talking about inflation, unemployment, employment, projections about the future, spending and time use, for example, so many things. Okay, so it's very important that you can check out these data sets. Also on Canvas website, which is the course website. You will find important resources, important data sets, and all of these are going to be used in the course, depending on which assessment, depending on which assignment you will be working on. All right, so that brings us to the end of this video, and let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.